Hi all. A very interesting game was played today in the candidates tournament, the World Championship candidates. In round 7, Dmitry Andreikin, who prior to this round had not managed to win a single game, could he change his fortunes? He was playing white against Veselin Topalov, who just the day before the rest day, had beaten the Russian number 1, Vladimir Kramnik. Dmitry Andreikin is ranked around 11 for Russian players, so could he do better? He played knight f3, the Re8 opening, to start off with. d5 from Topalov, d4, knight f6, c4, and now Topalov plays e6, so a very solid setup, classical occupation of the centre. Bishop g5, and often in Lightbook just bishop e7 is played here, but instead the bishop gets prompted here with h6. It is a popular move as well, and white's most popular response is just to take immediately on f6 after queen takes f6. Now usually white plays knight c3 here. That's the top move on my live book, over 200 games. e3 51, but this knight bd2 43, so slightly rare, and usually on a small sample black plays bishop b4. Here we go quite well out of theory now after bishop e7. Quite a rare position, apparently, this particular position. So what are its particular nuances? Let's put on a Kb1 here and see. Black seems to be, from an engine point of view anyway, doing slightly well. I think part of that must be the bishop pair. What has white's got going for him? Well, let's see, queen c2, pressure on the queen side. White doesn't necessarily have to castle on the king side just yet. Black castles, e3, and now a very aggressive move from Topalov, c5. So c takes d4, and also knight c6 maybe to follow. So a routine move here from white. This would show, for example, bishop d3, just to show this. C takes. If we play e takes, the pawns are slightly loose, and if we play knight takes d4, knight c6, and black is actually doing quite well. So white is actually prompted to just release the central pawn here. After c5, he just plays d takes c5, and now Veselin plays knight d7, and now white isolates black's queen pawn with c takes d5 here. After e takes, tries to establish a neat blockade point, knight b3. Black now tries to play quite aggressively on the queen side and maybe discourage white from any ideas of castling queen side. a5 is played. So let's imagine routine castling queen side here. I think black would be better actually with a4, and then just taking here, and with bishop d7 and a3 to follow. This looks fairly dangerous at the moment to try and do this. So white actually played a4, preventing a4 from black. Now a very aggressive move again from Veselin. He played b6, so he's trying to discourage that use of the c file, especially if the king's there. It looks really, really dangerous. But isn't there a slight snag with b6? White now plays c6, and you might think, isn't this too dangerous? Because there's bishop b4 check, the king's still in the centre. This is where it gets a bit crazy, this game. Black does play bishop b4 check, and to put a knight in front here I think would be quite dangerous. If knight bd2, for example, knight c5, and black's going to be playing bishop f5, that looks very uncomfortable indeed for black, this position. Uncomfortable for white, with black having a lot of pressure here. So white actually played, instead of in this position, after bishop b4 check, also moving the knight, this one, you might think, is that an improvement? Knight c5 again, and the same sort of idea, bishop f5. It's just dangerous for white to have this pin here. White actually just played king d1, so a remarkable idea. And you might think, well, how does this improve things? Can't black still play knight c5? Black did play knight c5. Technically that might not be the absolute best move. Maybe another idea like knight e5 could be more appropriate. Let's go with the game continuation. Knight c5, and again it seems bishop f5 is a dangerous move on the cards here, but white is just in time to stop that. Knight bd4, not just blocking the d pawn, controlling the f5 square. Now here it seems as though black should technically have played bishop g4. If, for example, bishop e2, then knight e6, there's pressure on the centre, and it looks strange to have the king here without being castled. Isn't this just looking pretty unsafe? Is there any substance to it? I mean, if h3 takes, knight takes, this just looks really quite dangerous because black's going to crash through the centre with d4. If white's not careful, it just looks very, very dangerous, this position. But black actually didn't play bishop g4, so it could be very useful to have this pin and win principle. He instead played knight e4, and actually white now just protects the c6 pawn even more, and I think this is a hyper aggressive move now at move 16. Perhaps black should consider fighting these knights, which are doing a very good job of not just blockading, I say, queen's pawn, but protecting c6. Possibly knight g5. That's an interesting move. And then maybe bishop c5 to try and put pressure on this one as well. Just putting pressure on both knights could be interesting. But black actually lashed out here with g5. The thing is, okay, there might be pressure on f2 here for g4 to be quite dangerous. For the moment, after protecting with h3, black has also slightly injured his own king side with this move. It creates some potential weaknesses. These weaknesses, as mentioned previously on the channel, when you create weaknesses, you're creating invitations later for the opponent's pieces. Potentially, it's like creating virtual invitations. At the moment, though, black doesn't seem to have much to worry about with the rooks not even connected with the king on d1. But this pawn should be a cause of concern here. Now Veselin actually continued aggressively with h5. And okay, white now played a super cool move, just king c1. The king is heading for shelter, and in doing this the rooks would become connected. Hello, hello. So you might think, well, what about g4 here? The beautiful thing, let's have a quick look at g4. Why isn't this a problem for f2? The thing is, hg, hg, and here the knight doesn't have to move. If the knight moves, obviously, then f2 looks to be an issue. But there's actually other issues even more significant than f2. f2 might not actually be the problem at all. In fact, here, if queen takes f2, maybe white can just take that and play rook f1. The actual issue, more significantly, in this sort of position, might just be something like bishop d2 first, and then possibly taking on f2. But even so, white's not without counterplay here. But in this position, though, there was a brilliant move played, not moving the knight. Can you guess what Dmitry Andreikin played in this position? If I give you 10 seconds starting from now, you might want to pause the video. So white to play. Okay, white played king b1. Now the strange thing about this tournament and this game even so far is that these grandmasters can play so aggressively. You might have got the impression they like to play solid chess like the Slav defense, but what is all this with g5, g4? It's super aggressive chess, and it does have that principle, even for super GMs, that these are virtual invitations for attack, invitations for white's pieces to come later to attack here. This vacuum here doesn't go unnoticed with king b1, because here if black takes on f3, Then g takes f3, and we've got this g file to work with. The king is going to go to a2 connecting the rooks, and this is going to be very, very dangerous. Even in this position though, the queen is coordinating with the rook, which means you know, if the knight steps to the wrong place, then it's mate in one. The knight can technically go to g5, but this wouldn't be very good because king a2 and the other rook's going to come in and pin that knight and threaten things like queen h7, and white still controls the f5 square. So that would be a very, very dangerous position here, indeed. I mean, just to pursue this just a little bit further, if black didn't want to lose the knight here, I mean, let's give king g7, f4, and if the knight moves back, then it's slaughter time, the two rooks. Black has just injured his own king safety by going after a knight. If you think back to the Romantic era, all the King's Gambit games, where players with black, you know, created isolated pawns and damaged their king safety, they were often after a knight in certain key variations of the King's Gambit. Here, you know, the knight sacrifice is stripped the black king bare of defences. But it's such a cool move, king c1 after bishop. Now, so instead of g4, black played bishop c5. It seems a bit late to fight this strong grip on the centre, and white continues with king b1. Again, not really concerned about g4 here. If we play g4 in this position, hg, hg, then again white can simply just connect the rooks with king a2. Very elegant, sweet move, connecting the rooks. They will be rejoicing here, and you know, g takes again. We're left fundamentally the same sort of thing. That the black king is just too unsafe. Bishop takes d4. We can throw in the check. And what is black actually doing? It just gets mated. So that's the pattern. You know, black has stripped his own king actually quite bare. So rook e8 was played, and now white plays king a2, and it looks quite cozy over here, this king, and black can't really open lines that easily to the white king either. Veselin is in trouble here. He plays rook a7, and now rook ad1 was played, and it looks as though another problem with the knight here, that d5 is slightly looser than usual. Nothing is protecting d5 here. There's no pawn to come in support of d5. It's slightly a loose pawn, and white actually might be threatening things like knight b3. Just a question of what is happening with this pawn. So that's pretty dangerous. So black actually here played king f8, and it looks to give an evacuation plan for the king, just in case g4 might actually be potentially useful. But and this maybe influenced white to play this sort of prophylaxis type move, rook hf1 against g4. Now Veselin played king g7. I know it's strange, but what can black actually do in this position? I mean, let's try and suggest another move. If bishop e6, which kind of you'd think usefully points here, we can just snap this off. And here, okay, white does stand nicely with knight d2. Even if we fix black's pawns, we can create some potentially more exploitable weaknesses. So knight takes, queen takes, and maybe just queen e2 later, or f4. I mean, there's this pawn to try and undermine, use as a lever to open the f file potentially. So this would be unpleasant for black, this sort of position. So anyway, we see this king g7, and now white just does a waiting move, king a1, maybe slightly safer because of the potential of bishop e6. But again, it seems knight e2, and this is going to be a real pain now. Maybe this is the intention now, that the king gets out of the way of that diagonal, sort of prophylaxis in advance of trying to put pressure on that pawn. Black now played bishop f8, and now the pawn is attacked with knight e2. So white threatens simply rook takes d5. You might think, well, here can't we protect the pawn? If we try bishop e6, does this fail tactically? I don't think to c7, I don't think that's a problem here, just rook c8, and the rooks are working to get that c7 pawn. But on the king side here, well, we could play h4 to try and open up lines, or knight fd4, and then for f4, I think this is the key thing, to try and open up this f file using that g5 pawn. So okay, the g5 pawn is a bit of a target as well. Veselin actually for the moment protects his d pawn with rook d8. And instead of going for the plan with f4 with knight fd4 and f4, there's another way of attacking this pawn, just h4. And this is very, very strong as well here. Let's examine why. If g takes, just for example, then knight f4 and white threatens, knight takes, forking queen and king. That's pretty nasty stuff. And also the d pawn is being attacked. So that will be a monster knight on f4. So black has to try and keep control of that, of this knight not coming here. But his next move doesn't really. I mean, what is white actually threatening? Well, hg anyway to grab this f4 by force. So g4, and now just knight f4. Actually forgetting about this threat. Black is in no position here to make that threat of g4 anymore. The king and queen are just in a ridiculous position for knight f4 to be very effective. King steps back, but now knight takes d5 is played, and this is just a total disaster for black. I believe actually Veselin Topalov resigned here. His knight is now loose, his queen's attacked. If he plays, for example, rook takes d5, then rook takes d5, and the knight's still loose, g takes, white can just, at minimum, play just queen takes e4. There's nothing to stop queen takes e4 here. Note the king has been prophylactically away from that diagonal, so that's not a problem, that diagonal. This is just material up for white for nothing. Threatening also rook takes h5. So a total disaster for black, this position. This game, it seems it totally backfired, moving pawns in front of his king. So if it can happen to the world number 4 though, it can happen to anyone. It seems chess is an incredibly complex game, and it was difficult to imagine this king just casually walking over to the queen's side like this in this game. Incredible stuff. And it's Dmitry Andreikin's first win, so congratulations to him. A fantastic game. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.